You're listening to KSCO, serving Big Sur, Felton, and Carmel Valley Village.
Opinions expressed on the following program are not necessarily those of KSCO staff, management, or advertisers. If something is said with which you disagree, please let us know by writing to us at comments@ksco.com.
You're listening to AM 1080, KSCO Santa Cruz, AM 1340, KOMY La Selva Beach, Watsonville. It is 4:09 on this soggy afternoon. It's Thursday, November 20th, and we have a returning not a couple, but a couple of favorite guests here. John Hibble and Dick Garwood are going to be joining us. But first, I want to let you guys know who they are, or just remind you a little bit about who John and Dick are. John Hibble is a longtime steward of the Aptos History, and one of the principal figures behind the creation of the Aptos History Museum. His involvement began in 1985 when a single historic photograph of the Aptos Railroad Station sparked a much larger effort to gather and preserve local artifacts. Over the years, John helped organize, expand, and formalize that growing collection, ultimately contributing to the establishment of the museum's dedicated facility in 2006. In addition to his curatorial work, John has been closely associated with the Aptos Chamber of Commerce, where he has supported numerous initiatives focused on documenting and sharing the community's historical heritage. Dick Garwood is also joining us. He is a board member of the Aptos History Museum, whose contributions blend both craftsmanship and historical interpretation. He played an important role in shaping the museum's physical displays, including the fabrication of custom exhibit cases and fixtures. Beyond his work behind the scenes, Dick has become known for leading local history tours and presenting accounts of notable regional events, including the well-known Seacliff incident involving Sheriff Trafton and Undersheriff Roundtree, which we talked about last time. In recognition of his sustained volunteer commitment to the Aptos area, Dick and his wife Heidi received a Community Enhancement Award in 2006. Dick Garwood, John Hibble joining us today. Last time they showed up, we talked about the SS Palo Alto and some of the history of Aptos. I'm sure that we're going to be discussing some of that as well as recapping some of it because it's just so fascinating. And who was it that lent me the book? I'm sorry. I got to turn you guys on. Here we go. That was
me, Dave. Dick.
Okay, and that book was called Forever Facing South, right?
Yes.
And after reading that book, which, by the way, so I got to tell you, Dick, I found that book on eBay because after thumbing through it today, it is such a great book for historical purposes. I mean, it's not a John Steinbeck novel or anything like that, but that's not what I was looking for. As far as talking about the history of the SS Palo Alto and pictures, I mean, it brought back memories for me personally. I didn't even realize that I remember looking into the hall until I saw some of those pictures. So I'm going to go ahead and announce the name of the book now because I bought a copy on eBay, the last copy. And so now if anybody wants to pick one up, they're going to have to pay top dollar. I got one for pretty darn reasonable price. So thank you for...
yeah, it's technically out of print.
Yes. It was printed in 1991, Forever Facing South.
And what I like about that book is the photographs.
Yeah.
All the great photographs from that time.
Absolutely love that book. That is a fantastic book. Forever Facing South. And that was written by...
David Herron.
David Herron. He's a local historian. I believe, John, that you said that David Herron was a librarian at UCSC. Is that right?
Yes.
Why? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have your microphone turned on. The wrong thing. Okay, let's...
Okay,
yes. There we go. Sorry
now,
about that.
Say yes again.
Yes again.
Okay, and who was... He's no longer with us, right?
I don't believe so, but he was... he wrote a couple of books. He was a real... expert at putting all the information together for subjects about this local community, including prohibition and things like that. But if it wasn't for Forever Facing South, a lot of us would know a lot less about the SS Palo Alto, the cement ship. And I want to bring up, we did a big presentation on the cement ship last month.
Right.
And it was a full house.
Good.
And it was really fun to do, but a lot of the research I did was after we had talked on the radio with you.
Oh.
And I wanted to share just a couple of things. And the first one was, we know it was open for 2 summers, and then the ship broke and started to come apart and that sort of stuff. But when I was doing the research, this one article said that on December 26th of 1931, so that was the end of the second summer, a big storm came in, and the waves were such that the ship moved out 4 feet.
Wow.
Which was a big deal because, they needed a ramp to get off the ship. So it was a little bit difficult. But the next day, December 27th, remember there were 3 anchors, 3.5-ton anchors. The back end of the ship connected to the pier swung 80 feet to the east.
Holy mackerel.
And then turned around and swung 80 feet to the west.
Oh, jeez.
And landed
Wow.
5 feet from where it started.
That is amazing.
And that's when the ship broke in half. And there was a copper seam down the middle of the ship. And when it got done bouncing around like that, the engine room flooded. And actually, oil was coming out of the ship, and all of the electricity and all the fresh water and all that stuff was destroyed. So, and remember, later on, it was a $2 million deal to get some oil out of the cement ship a few years ago because there were seabirds and seals and stuff dying. And nobody could figure out why there was oil on there. But the oil was how they ran the engine when the ship went across San Francisco Bay. And so there was still a little bit left for the engine. But to swing 80 feet, that makes me think that there were 2 anchors off the bow, and there must have been an anchor off the stern, probably about 40 to 80 feet away, and the ship swung that way, and it swung back until the chain stopped it. But
Wow.
that was the end of the road on that particular deal, and I didn't know that, so I think that's pretty significant.
And the oil that was leaking from the ship was leaking from what the ship ran on, because it never really hauled oil, even though that's what it was built to do, wasn't it?
Right, the oil compartments never saw oil, so it was pristine, and that's where the gambling and stuff went on down below, and they had a few rooms, I think, that were decked out. They originally planned to put 100 hotel rooms on board. I'm sure that never happened, but and the other thing was that you brought up, you said that there was a boat that brought people to the ship. And I said, no, I think you're thinking of something else. But my research came up with the fact that, yes, as soon as they opened, there was a boat that came from the Santa Cruz Wharf 3 times an evening to bring people out. The boat was big enough to have 50 people on board, and it was called the Markle. And it cost $1 for a round trip. But remember that dinner was 85 cents. So that was a little pricey.
Yeah.
So I got to call you on this. I think that you set us up.
Okay.
I start telling stories about the Ohlonies, and then I find out you're an Ohlone. And then we start talking about the cement ship, and you start telling me stuff that I didn't know. So I think you know more than we do.
That's not very likely.
It's a low bar.
But it's a good thing because that's how we learn. And if, like I said, if it wasn't for Dick coming into the museum and then asking what we knew about the shootout in Seacliff, I wouldn't know that story. But we all know it now.
And the interesting thing, one of the interesting things about that book, Forever Facing South, is that there's a picture of that guy who was at the center of the shootout at Seacliff.
Yes, Paul Woodside.
Paul Woodside, yes.
A picture of his cabin that was on that platform in front of the cave.
Yeah, very, very cool. You can actually see a picture of him, and the caption is funny. In one of his calmer moods, here's a picture of Paul Woodside?
Woodside, yeah.
Here's a picture of Paul Woodside, and he's just sitting there. He looks like a normal guy, but he apparently had a heck of a a temper on them. You know, the thing about the boat heading out to the SS Palo Alto, that was told to me by somebody. I don't know if you know who Charles Friedman is, Charlie Friedman.
Yeah, I used to hear him on the radio here.
Right, yeah. He told me about it, and I thought, well, you know, that's... and it just kind of stayed there in the back of my memory until I saw you guys, and I mentioned that. So I had heard it on pretty good authority from Charlie Friedman, who doesn't really make things up. I mean, he's a pretty solid guy. So when he told that to me, I figured it was probably true. Yeah.
One more thing on the shootout at Seacliff and the photos of the cabin and such. Currently at the library, the Aptos Branch Library, one of the displays we have on the wall is the Seacliff, the shootout at Seacliff. And there's a nice little story there on the wall and quite a number of good photos, including a photo of Howard Trafton and one of Under Sheriff Roundtree. There's a photo of Judge Bias. You remember the story that he was the one that wanted to have Woodside committed, and we all agree that was kind of an interesting name for a judge to have
Bias.
the last name of Bias.
Yeah,
but anyway, there's a
ironic.
currently display on the wall right now, and so I encourage people to go to the library and check that out.
And also at the library, they can purchase this book. Is this book still available?
That book is available. It's available at the Chamber of Commerce. We don't
Okay.
get to sell stuff at the library, though.
Okay. So at the Chamber of Commerce, you can pick up this book, Rio Del Mar, A Sedate Residential Community. I was looking through this as well. I don't know if you guys know this, but beginning of October, the station was hacked, and everything just went right down the pickle hole, man. So I've been here working crazy hours. Just my past 6 weeks, 8 weeks have been nothing but work for me, so I haven't had a chance to go through these books. But I went through that one today, Forever Facing South. I read most of that, and this one I just barely started to open up in the last hour or so. And this book right here, A Sedate Residential Community, Rio Del Mar, which is available at the Chamber of Commerce, is a great book. Talk about fun pictures. Holy smokes. And the text is nice and easy to read. It's easy on the eyes. This is a fantastic book.
It is, and the author of that book, Alan Collins, was known to be a quality researcher. He really looked into things, and so to this day, I don't think there's anything that's in that book that we have found to be in error.
Yeah, the pictures of the old Rio Del Mar and what do they call it? The bathing something or other.
The bathing pavilion.
The bathing pavilion. What a weird thing. I can't believe that was here.
Yeah, they dammed up the end of Aptos Creek right there by where the Rio Del Mar Flats is. And if you look over the edge still today, you can still see where there were platforms where you could stand and dive off of and so forth. It was billed as the world's largest
freshwater swimming pool.
Yeah, freshwater because it was water coming down from the creek.
You know, it's been a long time since I've been out there, but I remember seeing some sort of weird thing on the beach, right from the pathway of the river out towards the beach. Some kind of weird structure or walls or something. Is that part of the bathing pavilion? Do you know?
Well, if you're looking at the creek itself,
Uh-huh.
and you're on the Seacliff side of the creek, not the Rio Del Mar side.
Okay.
The walls there were the swimming pool walls, and the walls on the Rio Del Mar side too. But the bathing pavilion was on the Seacliff side, and those platforms are still there. Those platforms were not for diving in because it wasn't that deep. They were for getting into canoes because they rented canoes there. But right where you cross the creek is where the dam was. To the left of that, you see a bunch of pilings that go out toward the ocean.
Right, yeah.
And back in the day, they had actually built a pier out to the sand, almost as far as the waves. And you could walk out there, and then there were steps down to the beach. So that's been hammered pretty good, and it doesn't look like there's much of it left, but it does help a little bit in keeping the river from heading south.
Wow. So what was the pier for? I mean, it just went out to...
Good times, pleasure. Get you out to the beach, you know.
Well, didn't Spreckles build that and enlarge it and use it
now,
for shipping?
Spreckles had a wharf, which was That would be on the Seacliff side of Rio Del Mar beach. And when there's big storms and they pull the sand away, you can still see the pilings from that original wharf about 1850. But the Rio Del Mar company built themselves another little walkway out to the beach, which they called the pier. You got to remember that back in the 20s, a lot of people went to the beach in full suits. You know, it was just starting to be where people had reasonably decent bathing suits. And a lot of them wore wool, which wasn't very decent. Wet wool's not so good to swim in. But so a lot of people went to the beach and they weren't necessarily prepared for the water the way we are today. So walking out to the sand was a good thing.
Wow.
Well, interestingly, right along just jetting off of Soquel Drive there, right where you go under the railroad trestle or bridge, right before you come to Spreckles Drive, there's a little stub of a road there still called Aptos Wharf Road. And that goes right by where Uncle Kwok's, the Chinese restaurant, used to be. I don't believe it's called something else now, but that was Aptos Wharf Road, and I think it dead ends now right there adjacent to the shopping center and where the railroad track is. But that road did go out to that wharf, so that's why that road is called Aptos Wharf Road.
The road you're talking about is, so if you're heading towards Santa Cruz and you pass Nisene Marks, there's that big railroad trestle there.
Yes.
And if you were to turn at the lights, I think there's some lights there.
There's
turn
a light,
left.
that's Spreckles Drive. Then you go under the railroad bridge. It's a concrete bridge.
Okay.
And then the first left after that would be Aptos Wharf Road.
Past Spreckles Drive.
Yeah.
So
towards Santa Cruz from Spreckles Drive.
Yeah, it looks
just
like a little
100
alley.
yards.
Yeah,
but you can access it from where the UPS store is.
The parking lot there in front of that shop, that kind of strip mall there.
And that road comes to a dead end. It doesn't go out to the beach any longer.
No. But the interesting thing to me, anyway, is that was the main street in town before the railroad came, because that was the original town on that side of Aptos Creek. So there was a road that went all the way down to actually on the Seacliff side, and it actually went down the cliff down to the level where the wharf was, because everything was shipped, because the canyons were so steep until the railroad got there. It was really hard to negotiate the area. Between here and Monterey, it was just a series of gulches 100 feet deep. So everything went by ship.
Wow.
But to get stuff down to the wharf, they'd put stuff in the wagons and have horses or mules haul them out there. And then to go down the cliff, they'd throw an anchor out the back end of the wagon to keep it from running over the horses.
Well, I mean, if it works, right?
Exactly.
So I was reading that book and I found a few things. Let's talk about the SS Palo Alto because everybody likes that, and we'll just recap a few things here. So the SS Palo Alto, there's pictures of it in there as it's being launched, and it's just being dropped into the water sideways, like we always see ships being dropped into the water. This was launched on May 29th of 1919. The World War I was around 1918, wasn't it?
Right. The war had ended by the time the ship was construction was complete, so it was never used for its intended purpose.
I think the launch was exactly 30 days before the Treaty of Versailles. So, yeah, it was never used, but...
Was it designed to be used for, not obviously, but it was designed to haul oil. Was that for war purposes, wartime purposes? I mean, what was that oil going to be used for? Where was it going to be traveling?
Yeah, absolutely. It was for wartime purposes because remember that steel was in short supply. And that's the whole purpose of having a concrete ship, was to keep the steel for warships. And so they would be bringing oil to warships. That's the theory.
Got it. Okay, I was wondering what would they be doing with the oil, but that makes sense. And also it makes sense that they would be saving the steel for the warships. Concrete was a relatively new thing to make ships from, wasn't it? around this time?
Yeah, the first concrete ships were made only just shortly before that war, and they were made primarily by the people who designed and built those ships. Who was the name?
The Norwegian?
The Norwegian.
His name was Nikolai Foner.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I wrote that down. I was thinking,
Yeah.
no one's going to want to know his name, but I might as well write it down. Nikolai Foner. And I guess the first ship that he built was 84 feet long. The SS Palo Alto, 434 feet long. And so to put that in perspective, that's about the size of 1.5 football fields.
Yeah.
Approximately.
I think he built 3 ships before he convinced the
Shipping board.
the shipping board that they needed to build them out of concrete. They'd save money and they'd save steel. They put 7 times as much rebar in that concrete as they would on land concrete development. I think we may have mentioned that last time, but well, that's because the boat flexed and it needed that kind of support. Still didn't stop it from coming apart with the giant waves.
Well, I mean, the ocean is so strong, and then plus if part of it's submerged and the waves moving around, it's going to crack. I mean, that was just inevitable. So one of the things about concrete is that it was more brittle than steel would be, but it was also very easy to fix. That was one of the advantages of using concrete.
Little fixes.
Little fixes, yes.
Not when the entire hull cracks in half.
And I was wondering, well, what if it was attacked by something? But this wasn't meant to be a battleship. This was a hauler, right? In this case, It was going to haul oil. It was just intended to haul things. It was not going to go into battle or get into gnarly fights. And
one of these ships, I think, that was built previously, either ran into something or something ran into it, and it sank. I think the description was like a rock.
Yeah, it was. I see. I just went through that book and marked some of this stuff down. It collided with a steel ship that was loaded with granite, and it sank in 3 minutes. Okay. In 3 minutes, I think 19 people went down with that ship. It sank so fast.
Yeah.
Wow. Did it have a sister ship? It seems like it might have had.
Yes, the SS Peralta.
Peralta. Yeah,
I think it was about the same, at the exact same size, I believe.
Yeah, it was identical. And the Peralta, I understand, is still floating.
Whoa!
There, up in Canada, there was a lumber mill up there that wanted to have a breakwater, for the logs, and they have 10 concrete ships in that breakwater, including the Peralta, and so. The whole deal is that concrete is fine under pressure, but it's not fine for static bouncing around. And so that's the reason that our ship looks like a big chunk of rock out there, and the sister ship is still floating.
There are also some cement ships, I understand, on the East Coast that are being used as breakwaters.
And breakwater is what is that?
Just to stop the waves from coming in to make calmer seas at the beach or for a harbor or for loading a wharf.
Doesn't it, the idea of sinking a ship out there off the beach seem crazy, because you would think at high tide it might get submerged, and at low tide, you would think that stuff would matter. Waves would go over the top. It just seems like a crazy idea.
For our ship?
Yeah.
Well, there hadn't been a big sea storm for 16 years before the Seacliff Company started development. So, how beautiful it is here and how wonderful, and we're on a bay. We're not right out on the Pacific Ocean. It made perfect sense to some people.
So this thing, it didn't start, when it was being used for entertainment purposes. There was a ballroom and a dining area and all this fun stuff. There was even a swimming pool. Was it sunk to the bottom then, or was it still floating at that time?
No, it was actually sunk to the bottom, and they opened up the stopcocks in the bottom, filled up the tanks with water, and it was supposed to have the tanks filled with sand. I'm not sure that ever happened. I think that's one of the reasons that it bounces and moves around a lot. But that was the intent. So, yes, they sunk it.
I went out to Seacliff Beach just a few days ago and saw the ship for the first time in a very long time. Maybe I saw it once after it was, in its current state. And for the most part, I mean, yes, it's obviously destroyed, but it's still, for the most part, recognizably a ship, and it's still, for the most part, in a straight line. Amazing.
But I think it was 2017 when the back section rolled over. I think it was maybe 2016 when it broke. The back section broke, and then it rolled over in 38-foot waves. Supposedly, not supposedly, but the largest wave since they started recording wave heights.
Wow.
But when you think about that ship moving 80 feet one way and then the other, those waves were probably not recorded, and I'm just thinking that storm was a biggie.
Probably bigger than the one that ripped it up in the last time.
Exactly.
Wow. 831-479-1080, 218-5726, kscodave@gmail.com. We're past our break, so I'm going to take a 2-minute break, and when we get back, we'll talk more about this or kind of move into other aspects of Aptos history. I believe last time you were here, I think we ended talking about the Rispin Mansion a little bit.
No, we never did get into the Rispin Mansion.
We never
You mentioned you wanted to talk about it, but we never got there.
Can we talk about the Rispin
No,
Mansion?
that's Capitola.
Okay.
And we don't know a lot about
Okay,
it.
we're focusing on Rio Del Mar and the Aptos area, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. We're going to take a 2-minute break, and we'll be right back. Keep it tuned in. This is AM 1080, KSEO Santa Cruz, Flight 1080. Returns after this.
It must be, it has to be, with that big sound it's gotta be KSCO.
You're listening to AM 1080 KSEO Santa Cruz. We are being joined by John Hibble and Dick Garwood. We're discussing the SS Palo Alto and the history of Rio Del Mar. Thank you very much. Not Aptos, not Aptos, yes. Capitola, no. Right? Rio Del Mar and Aptos.
We love Capitola, but no.
But okay, so you just handed me a bookmark here with the beautiful picture of the SS Palo Alto. I guess this was taken in 1930. This looks very different than the Palo Alto I remember going out and fishing off of when I was a kid. First of all, does my memory serve me correctly? I did go out there and fish, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. But by the time you went out there, all that superstructure that you're looking at on that bookmark photo is gone. I mean, it was dismantled right away after the ship itself cracked in half.
From this, it looks like some of the building, these wooden structures, are they hanging off the side of the ship? I mean, are they wider than the ship? Can you tell?
No, they're the same width as the ship. I think it was 54 feet.
54 feet wide. Yeah. So what am I looking at here? I'm looking at buildings on top of this concrete ship. What are they?
Well, you have the midway. Out at the end of the ship, you have the ballroom, which was the length of a football field.
Wow.
Yeah.
You have the dining room.
The dining room was above that.
The swimming pool is in there somewhere.
In the middle, in the engine room. Yeah.
There's these big, long wooden buildings on top of the cement ship, separated by, in the middle, they're not connected, and that's where the swimming pool would be.
The swimming pool was below that section, yes.
And the part that's facing the pier, is that the back or the front of the ship? And the fore or aft, the bow or the stern?
That's the stern, yeah.
That's the stern, and that means what, the back?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
hence the title of David Heron's book, Forever Facing South. So that pier, it's actually, the stern is facing north, and it was towed in stern first.
Why?
Why not?
Okay. That answers that.
Maybe so that the bow would cut waves that were coming in.
Of course. Yeah, that makes total sense. Otherwise, that makes total sense. So they bring this boat in, and they didn't back it up to the pier, did they?
They towed it.
They towed it.
They pulled it in as far as they could. They used the anchors, and they used a winch, a windlass, to pull it in as far as they could. Uh-huh. And then they finished building the pier right out to it.
I see.
And it was as high as the pier at that point.
So they had a partial pier out there. They pulled the boat as close as they could, and they finished building the pier to the boat.
Yes.
This was all part of their plan. They were going to have the pier going out to the boat, and then from there you could dance and eat and even go swimming. It was an entertainment center.
And fishing, too, at the time, yeah.
And
it was
fishing.
just a pleasure ship. Good times.
Man, dude, I would love to be around back in those days. Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that? I can't see it from here, but that photo has old cars on the pier, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think,
Yes, it does, as a matter of fact, now that you say that, yes.
Yeah. So that was at the height of its operation, and those cars are from the late 20s or early 30s.
yeah,
Those
the
vintage.
pier was full because I think the first night there was 5,000 people came for the opening.
Wow.
5,000.
And they could all fit on that boat, I'm assuming.
Evidently. Yeah. Well, remember, it's 400 feet long.
Was there anything that went underneath the deck of the boat, underneath the top surface? I mean, could people go down?
Yes, but I think you had to be invited because there was gambling, and there was, I'm sure there was booze.
Yeah.
In fact, I know for a fact that at some point the rum runners actually pulled up alongside the ship and offloaded directly and then left.
because Prohibition was in place by then. In
Right.
20? When did Prohibition? 28, 27?
Prohibition was 20, wasn't it? Yes.
But it was still in effect in the early 30s.
Until 33 or 35.
Wow.
Yes.
Very, very cool. What else? Is there anything else to cover about the SS Palo Alto, or should we move on to Rio Del Mar?
Well, let's move along.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rio Del Mar, I saw some pictures in this book here that is available again at the Aptos Chamber of Commerce, correct? Rio Del Mar, a sedate residential community. Some interesting pictures. I don't know what to think of. What was Rio Del Mar? What was the original vision for Rio Del Mar?
Well, remember that Klaus Spreckels purchased what was left of the Aptos Rancho from Rafael Castro. And that was something like 5,200 acres, 5,300 acres. And he used it as a cattle ranch. He also built the finest summer hotel in California on Spreckels Drive. So, you know, he liked to get out of San Francisco. That's where all of his work with sugar and all that sort of stuff was. So this was his getaway, but he wanted to spruce it up so that when his friends came to visit, and lots of them spent the summers here, he had this great hotel. He had a bowling alley. He had a bar. You could rent boats and things to go out into the surf. It was a pretty happening place. But he kept this land off the market for 50 years, almost exactly 50 years, where, you know, other places were building up. And he died just after the San Francisco earthquake, and his family kept the ranch going for a while, but then they wanted to get rid of it and get some money. So they sold all of this land that was left. Spreckels had sold some off too. To one person from Pomona, and he was smart enough to get offers ahead of time to sell it all off so that he could finance that purchase and make a little money on it. Mm-hmm. So Rio Del Mar, it's the roaring 20s. People have money. It's good times. 1924, and Seacliff and Rio Del Mar all came out of selling off the San Cristina investment company. So everything was happening then. Lots of money. People wanted to have either second homes or first retirement homes, that sort of thing at the beach. Mm-hmm. So it was just the perfect time, but it wasn't.
So what part of Rio Del Mar is Deer Creek? Yes,
Deer Park.
Deer Park.
Yeah.
Didn't we talk about that?
We did. We talked about it a little bit last time.
Okay. And remind me what Deer Park was supposed to be. Was it supposed to be a hunting
Yes,
preserve?
It was a walled-off area that Spreckels built for his guests. It was stocked with game, and so that they would go game hunting inside this fence-off area. I think the fence was like 8 feet high or something like that.
8 to 12 feet high, and it ran along about where Bonita Drive is and Clubhouse Drive, and it enclosed that area.
Okay.
And that was so that his friends that came from San Francisco and were going to spend 3 months of the summer down here had something to kill.
And the Deer Park Marketplace Shopping Center is right there at the end of where that hunting preserve would have been.
I'm having trouble kind of in my mind mentally picturing what Rio Del Mar is, where its borders are.
Well, when you get off on Rio Del Mar Boulevard and go towards the ocean from Highway 1, the freeway, and you go down Clubhouse Drive and all those streets back in there, fan out and form what's Rio Del Mar. So Rio Del Mar is not a name of a town or anything. It was a real estate development. And you asked earlier what Rio Del Mar was envisioned to be, and it was envisioned to be subdivisions where they would sell residential lots, and part of the draw was a golf course. And so they built the golf course starting in 1925. The front 9 opened in 25. And actually, speaking of that, if you don't mind me segueing into next year's centennial celebration of the Seascape Golf Course, is their 100-year celebration, and all year long they're going to be having events that are in honor of the centennial celebration of the golf course. So there was a huge clubhouse. Not right where the golf course is. There was a big hotel up on the cliff overlooking. If you went down to where the Rio Del Mar flats are, what's the name of the restaurant down there? Cafe Rio.
Yeah, it's now Venus.
Okay,
Yes.
Yeah, and if you go up Beach Drive looking out at the ocean up to the left, there's condominiums there on the right now. A whole line of them. But there used to be the hotel, which burned down in 1963, I believe, John.
Yes.
So,
but that hotel didn't open until, I think, 29 or 30. And so it didn't open until the Depression. And that's the comment I made where the timing wasn't really very good. But the golf club opened, they started building in late 24. They got the first 9 open without the clubhouse in the fall of 25, and they got the clubhouse open and the second 9 in the spring of 26. And that's where the 100th year anniversary is going to come from.
So Rio Del Mar actually goes out to near where the cement boat is, right?
Near.
Near.
But that's Seacliff. These developed at exactly the same time, the same idea. But if you take Aptos Creek as a dividing line,
right,
there, Seacliff has cliffs, hence the name, and they drop down toward the creek. But there are some houses on that side of the creek. They're in Rio Del Mar. But if you take Aptos Creek and you go out toward Freedom Boulevard, and you go up to about where the freeway is, that's Rio Del Mar.
Okay. So the part that goes down to the beach on this side of the river, on this side of Aptos Creek, is that Rio Del Mar?
If you're down at the creek, yes. But if you're up on the hill, that's Seacliff.
Okay. I'm wondering how much of that village down there, Rio Del Mar, is original, how much of it has been washed away by storms. I mean, you say we could still see some of the piers of the old wharf that went from Aptos Creek out onto the beach, kind of out to nowhere, other than just a walkway, I'm assuming. Anything you can tell us about how much of Rio Del Mar is original and changes that have happened because of storms?
Well, I don't know if it's all just because of storms, but it's a little bit like Seacliff in that time has eroded a lot of stuff. So the hotel burnt down. on St. Patrick's Day. They were having a great big party for the predecessor of PG&E. And I think we mentioned that the walls were in the hotel were hollow so that they could put booze in the walls.
I had forgotten about that. That's always good stuff to recap, though. That's always
and
interesting.
That's one of the reasons why they couldn't put the fire out, because current building, you have to have fire stops, which are things that keep the air from going straight up to the roof. So that burnt down at that time. We all remember the Sea Breeze Bar, which was... so when they started developing Rio Del Mar, right at just about the time the Depression happened, that's when they built the world's largest freshwater swimming pool. That's when they built the bathing pavilion. And storms took out the bathing pavilion.
Where was the bathing pavilion? That was right there near Aptos Creek?
Yeah, it was on Aptos Creek, and it was on the Seacliff side of the creek, but down at the creek level. So that's Rio Del Mar still. The most important thing that we still have is the golf club, and that was the very first clubhouse for the resort before they were able to build the main building up on the hill.
And you mentioned the Sea Breeze Bar, and that burned down fairly recently, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But prior to that, back in the day, it was one of the first buildings built in that flats area, I believe, and I think it served, at least for a while, as the office for the real estate developer.
It did, yes. It was a very exclusive, highbrow kind of community. If you bought a lot, you got a lifetime certificate to be a member of the club. But in terms of Aptos, if you weren't a member of the club, a lot of this place, like the beach, was restricted. So you had to know a member of the club to get on the beach and places like that. So it was very, shall we say, hoity-toity.
John, I think an interesting story. Please tell us about the how that Rio Del Mar Flats area was elevated something like 7 feet because it was an estuary before that. And where did that dirt come from? There's a story there that I think is great.
Absolutely. So having a senior moment. So the hotel, Rio Sands. So where the Rio Sands hotel and vacation rentals are today, do you know where that is?
No.
If you're going down toward the beach on Beach Drive, on Aptos Beach Drive,
Okay.
there's a really wonderful little hotel that's just 2 blocks off the ocean.
Okay.
And so that whole area that we call the Flats, there used to be a hill there, a fairly large hill. And when the developers came along, and I have to say that whole area was an estuary, and it hugged the edge of the existing hill that we have today. But this hill that was in the middle of it, the developers pushed into the flats area to raise it 7 feet so that it was dry except when storms come in, and sell lots there. But it was very exclusive in terms of they didn't want a lot of business. They didn't want shopping centers. They didn't want that kind of thing there. They wanted people to have an exclusive club, the golf club, the hotel. They had tennis courts at the hotel. Remember that there was a time when they were playing polo out in the polo fields. The polo fields closed about the same time they finished building the hotel. So this was a very upscale place. And they didn't want to have a bunch of businesses, but they wanted to have them right there at the flats, right at the parking lot. And so the Sea Breeze was the first one built. And what happened was there wasn't a lot of money available at that point to continue to build out that area. So the Sea Breeze was the last thing sort of in that area that was from that time. And then it took a long time before, the market was there, and Cafe Rio went in and became Venus. But that was an empty lot for a long time.
So that parking lot there, and You could park almost really, really close to the beach right there in the flats, the Rio Del Mar flats. Is that higher than it used to be? I mean, if they knocked that hill down and spread the dirt out.
Yeah, they raised it 7 feet.
Because that was what used to be an estuary at the end of Aptos Creek where it came out to the ocean. So it fanned out there.
Right. Wow. Jeez. Holy cow. You could never do that nowadays. Holy smokes.
Do you think?
Wow.
No, there were cattle down there. We have a picture of it before it was developed, and there's cows grazing out there, and there's, it's definitely a beautiful estuary. The Rio Del Mar, the cliff where Rio Del Mar Boulevard runs up to where they built the hotel, they shaved that off. So all of this material went in. And originally, all creeks, at least in the northern hemisphere, have a tendency to veer south as soon as they reach the ocean. Okay? And so this creek tended to hug the edge of the cliff on the eastern side, in other words, the Watsonville side. Mm-hmm. And when they developed this area, they shoved the river over to the western side, and then they built the walls to control it. But and so that's one reason why a lot of times when the creek isn't running really fast, it tends to swing way to the left across the beach and go toward the island and Beach Drive. And when the river is really full, it tends to go straight out to sea. But everything turns left and goes toward Monterey.
So for people who are just tuning in, we have 2 minutes before we hit the top of the hour. Remind me of where people can see evidence of the swimming pavilion and whatever structures were out there.
If you go down to the end of Rio Del Mar Boulevard and you drop down into where the parking lot is, park and walk over to where the creek is, and you'll be looking directly at where the bathing pavilion used to be, and you'll see the cement wall, and you'll see the sort of cement fence that kept people from falling in, and you'll see those platforms that people used to get into the canoes that they rented in this great big wonderful swimming pool.
It was that big. It was just
yeah,
it was the world's largest.
Freshwater might be a little sketchy. I think that Sandy Lydon mentioned that there were so many houses without sewer lines that fresh. That's debatable. Luckily, it didn't last long.
Watsonville had something like that too. The Pajaro River they had dammed up, and there were people out there in boats, and they had bands on barges. just a big celebration. It must have been a wonderful time.
Oh, I think there was no restrictions. There wasn't so many people. That we were busy screwing things up, but there wasn't enough of us to do a big job of it.
But when you look in your book, I believe there's a photo that when you get your copy of the bathing pavilion, which was a beautiful Spanish tile, long, low, single-story building that had changing rooms and locker rooms and that kind of thing. And it was I can't tell you the architect's name, but it was designed by a well-known architect who did a lot of buildings along that area, and it was a handsome building.
And that's what you can see parts of, or the.
Well, there's none of that left now.
Right.
That was all destroyed. But it was right parallel to the Aptos Creek, the world's largest freshwater swimming pool.
You can see where it used to be.
Thanks, folks. You're listening to KSCO, serving Aromas, the Carmel Highlands, and Paraiso Springs.
You're listening to AM 1080, KSCO Santa Cruz, AM 1340, KOMY, La Selva Beach, Watsonville. We are hanging out today with John Hibble and Dick Garwood. We're talking about Rio Del Mar, the SS Palo Alto, a little bit about Seacliff, and not Capitola. We're not going to talk about Capitola. Gentlemen, you are putting on a fantastic show. Now, I want to try something different. We're going to we're going to talk a little bit about this coloring book and where people can pick up more books like this and other things that are going on. But I want you guys to ask questions of each other so that we can get into more stories like the one about the Rio Del Mar flats being raised by 7 feet. I would have never got around to a question that would lead to that story. So I want you guys to do more about that. But first, let's cover what's going on at the Chamber of Commerce and what people can purchase there and check out.
Well, the Aptos History Museum was founded at the Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, wow.
And because we were given this beautiful picture of the Aptos Railroad Station, and we put it on the wall. And people would say, wow, that's amazing. Where is it? And the answer was, where was it? And the quick little story about that is Aptos was built at the edge of a cliff, and it was back in the days of horse and buggies. And when they decided that they were going to widen the road and pave it for automobiles, the Aptos railroad station was across the street, and there wasn't enough room between the railroad station and the buildings on the cliffside, so they had to tear the railroad station down.
Wow.
To put the road in. And, you know, it would be almost impossible to widen the road through Aptos Village today because there's historic buildings on the south side, and right behind them is a cliff, so you couldn't move them. So that's why the railroad station disappeared. But people would look at that and say, well, I've got some old pictures. Would you like to have copies of them? And the answer was always yes. And now we have thousands of old pictures, and it's just wonderful to have all of these things available. And it happens from people like Dick walking in and saying, do you know about these murders? People walk in and they either ask questions or they tell me stories. And that's how we built it all. Now, the museum now is a 501c3, so it is a separate organization, and it's tax deductible, everything that you give. But I still work out of the chamber, and all this stuff is on my computer. So when we say keep going to the chamber, that's the reason. Our museum building got sold a couple years ago. And now we have amazing displays, largely done by Dick and Heidi Garwood. 5 different places in the Aptos library. If you haven't been to that library, do yourself a favor and go see it, because it's spectacular. But also go see the 5 places where we have rotating displays, because we're just thrilled to be able to put together amazing things for people to go see.
So Dick walks in and says, hey, have you heard of these murders? He asked. What? Somebody says, hey, you want a copy of this picture? Do you want a copy of this picture? And somebody comes in and says, hey, do you know about these murders? That would catch my ear like, holy mackerel. Yeah, I want to know about those. And we talked about those last time. That was the ones that happened up on Seacliff, right?
The shootout at Seacliff, yes.
Seacliff.
Okay.
And currently, I say it again, there's a display on one of the walls in the back corner of the library that has a whole bunch of great photos and a story about that whole shootout.
The Aptos Library, do they have any events coming up? Do they have anything that people should keep an eye out for?
I don't think we have anything on our schedule now, but we do put on, we put on a presentation about the SS Palo Alto, the cement ship, last month. And a few months before that, we did a presentation on that silent movie, The One-Way Trail, and we've done several others. So about every 4 to 6 months, we'll be doing other presentations at the library, along with, we're supported by the organization called Friends of the Library, and those presentations are all put on for free.
Okay. Is there anything else that we should... Oh, this coloring book. Tell me about the coloring book.
The coloring book is these are line drawings that actually my wife Heidi put together, and they're in a spiral bound, nice little coloring book that would be great for kids of all ages to color in. I think everybody likes to color, but it would be a great Christmas stocking stuffer kind of a thing, and they're available for $20 at the Aptos Chamber of Commerce.
There's 17 pages. They're all beautiful, but they're not only just pictures to color. The history is right there
it's
with
history.
it.
Yeah. Like here's the picture of of that guy, Paul Woodside. Is that his name?
There, yeah.
He's right there. You could color him in. You can make him. You can make him angry.
Yeah.
Put a little angry face on him.
Yeah.
This is great. How many pictures are in here to color?
There's 17.
17 pictures.
Yeah.
A Deer Park Tavern. Holy smokes!
And it's not just kids. This is a wonderful piece just to have the information from Aptos, but also, seniors. It's a really wonderful thing to give to seniors, too.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great thing.
Especially if they're from this area. I mean, like this picture, I'm sure there's people out there who remember the SS Palo Alto with the big, what are they called? The
Masts.
Masts, which they cut down, I think the book said in 1950 or 59, somewhere around there.
Around 57, yeah.
57. Yeah. So there's probably people out there that still remember the ship with those things. Yeah, this is a great coloring book. And where can they pick this up?
At the Aptos Chamber of Commerce.
$20.
$20.
Correct.
Worth the Betsy Jane.
That's the little engine that built the railroad.
There's a story.
I'm sorry. This is a fundraiser for the Aptos History Museum. John was saying we're a 501c3, and we don't have funding from anything other than certain presentations we put on. As long as they're outside the library, we can make a small charge for those, and
membership.
Yeah, memberships and donations. So that's why we encourage people to go to the website to make donations or to join the museum.
And where is that again? What's the name of the website?
AptosHistory.org.
AptosHistory.org. Okay, we'll mention that a few more times here. But I heard you talking with John about some interesting things. You were going to ask him a question, or
if I could, I'd like to. We were on the topic before the break of the development of Rio Del Mar and what was there. And one of the interesting things that was there that I'll bet you most people don't know about was there was a small private airstrip there, the Rio Del Mar Airport, which was there from 1936 to 1940. And it was right along the edge of the cliff there. What street would be close to it now, John?
Well, you'd run down Cliff Drive toward Watsonville, and it was down near the end there.
Yeah. But there was a very famous person who worked at that airport for a time, and his name was Douglas Corrigan. And you might recognize, because he became famous later on, because he was known as Wrong Way Corrigan. And if that rings a bell, I don't know.
It doesn't, but I want to hear the story.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
Just try and stop me.
Wrong Way Corrigan. Okay, tell me the story of Wrong Way Corrigan.
Wrong Way Corrigan was a young aircraft mechanic and pilot, and he actually worked on Charles Lindbergh's plane that crossed the Atlantic in 1927, I want to say. And he was so inspired that he thought he should be able to do it too. And he bought a small plane and he rigged it out with extra gas tanks and so forth. But at that time, to do transatlantic crossings, you had to get permission from the United States government. And they were not keen to give permission because they wanted to make sure that nobody just crashed and was lost at sea, because aviation was being promoted by the government, and they wanted it to be promoted as a safe, worthwhile thing to do.
Right.
So, Wrong Way, Douglas Corrigan, he wasn't known quite as Wrong Way yet. He was out of New York. He took off late in the evening, claiming that he was going to fly back to California, maybe to the Rio Del Mar Airport. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it was during that time, because this was 1939, and he took off, and he claims that he read his compass wrong, that he looked at the wrong end of the needle, and so he headed out over the Atlantic Ocean instead.
Wow.
And landed
Wow.
29 hours later or something like that in Ireland. And he never, ever admitted that he had done that on purpose. And so he was forever known as Wrong Way Corrigan. And when he became quite a hero, almost a cult hero, they gave him a ticker tape parade, and he would promote things, wrong way kind of things, like he endorsed a wristwatch that ran counterclockwise, something like that. But one of the funny, I think it's funny, he was, this aircraft that he had was kind of a ramshackle thing. It was just soldered together, and that's one of the reasons the government deemed it to be non-airworthy. And as he was crossing the Atlantic Ocean, he noticed that his feet were cold, and that it turned out they were awash with gasoline that was leaking from one of the big extra gas tanks that he had installed. So he used a screwdriver and punched a hole in the floor of the cabin away from the hot exhaust pipe to drain the gasoline out so that you wouldn't have a mid-air explosion. And so maybe the government was probably within their rights to not give him a permit. But I think they took away his pilot's license for something like 15 days, and he became quite a famous character. Now, and he actually died in 1995 at age 88. So this is pretty fairly recent history.
Yeah. 1995, that wasn't that long
But
ago.
we keep talking about these interesting people, interesting characters, I'll say, who lived in or had something to do with Aptos, and he's certainly one of those.
Mm-hmm. Wrong Way Corrigan.
Wrong Way Corrigan.
That is funny.
Yeah.
Now, he obviously, he had to have known that, hey, I don't remember all this water being somewhere in between the East Coast and West Coast, right? So he knew what he was doing. He just said, I don't know.
He claimed it was foggy, and So, like I said, to the end of his life, he never admitted that he did it on purpose. But the general consensus was very certain that that's what had happened, because he couldn't get permission otherwise.
Where was the airport again? Remind me, in Rio Del Mar. Where was that?
Well, it would have been, if you go down Rio Del Mar Boulevard, as it turns to the right and goes down to the flats. If you turn to the left, that's Cliff Drive. And so Cliff Drive runs all the way out to about Hidden Beach. And it was at the far end of Cliff Drive.
And there's all houses in that area now.
Yeah, there was no development in that particular area right then. But by the time the airport closed, they were selling those lots. So it was...
it's all houses now. I know somebody that lives out in that area, so that is approximately where this airport was in Rio Del Mar.
Yes.
Wow. Very, very cool. What else do you have in there in your stack of things there? Because I know you have all kinds of interesting facts.
Well, actually, not necessarily apropos to anything we've really just been talking about, but I think an interesting thing for people to know about was our Aptos Little League in 2002 went to the Little League World Series.
All right.
Do you remember that? And the museum, they got a huge trophy. It was 3 or 4 feet tall that we actually have in our possession. But it was an amazing accomplishment because it went in 2002 to the 56th annual Little League World Series tournament in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And I actually looked up some what I think are amazing numbers. Listen to this. In 2002, more than 2.3 million 11 and 12-year-olds participated on approximately 177,000 teams in about 7,000 Little League baseball leagues worldwide. Only 200 players on 16 teams made it to Williamsport, and our team made it to the Final Four.
Wow.
2002.
So it sounds like we didn't quite win it, but we got pretty darn close.
Make it to the Final Four, and I don't know that trophy could be any taller.
I was going to say a 4-foot tall trophy, probably as tall as some of those kids.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, and speaking of things 4 feet tall, if I may go on, going back to the Rio Del Mar golf course, what I think is a fascinating story. We mentioned last time how the Ohlone Indians burned the coastal plain, so there would be grassland for the smaller animals that they preferred to hunt. And so there were no trees in Rio Del Mar or along the golf course. We mentioned that we have a photograph of Mary Pickford playing golf there, and the trees all around there were very, very small. So as Rio Del Mar was being developed, there was a landscape guy that Monroe, Line, and Miller had used in some of their other developments. His name was Luigi Duarte, I believe, and he set up a nursery to grow seedling trees for something like 4,000 or 5,000 trees that he planted throughout Rio Del Mar development on for the residential areas and at the golf course. And he stayed at a home along where the golf course was, where there was a 10-year-old boy whose name was Marvin Fambrini. And Marvin was asked by Luigi to come out to the middle of the fairway, one of the fairways adjacent to his house, and plant a small tree. And it was just a 4-foot tall little seedling. Mm-hmm. Well, eventually, of course, that tree became much, much taller. I think it was a cypress tree. And I'm sure some of our listeners out there might remember back in the day when that tree had at that time it was the 6th hole, but then it became the 15th hole because they reversed the 9s. And there was a flag, like a golf hole flag, mm-hmm. at the top of that tree. Mm-hmm. Well, that tree was eventually starting to die, and so this Marvin Fambrini, he's now 79 years old, and he's an avid golfer still playing golf at Aptos or at Seascape Golf Course, and he comes to that hole. And they stopped play. They said, we're going to have to just stop play for a minute because we're going to be cutting down a tree out there. It was the very tree that he had planted.
Wow.
70 years before.
Did he climb up and get the flag?
He didn't have to climb. It was on the ground. But isn't that an amazing coincidence?
Smart enough, yeah.
Again, another interesting person from Aptos who has such an interesting story.
Wow. 831-479-1080. We are here with John Hibble and Dick Garwood talking about history of Aptos and Rio Del Mar. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to call in. Text messages can be sent to 218-5726. Email can be sent to kseodave@gmail.com. And if you are looking for Christmas is just around the corner. And one of the hardest things to find, a gift, for me, it's hard to find gifts that are not, that are special, right? And I think if you know somebody, a longtime resident, and you want to blow them away, a gift that they're never going to get anywhere else, you're not going to find this at Target or online or anything, this Aptos History coloring book is very, very cool. I think this would make an excellent gift for any longtime residents. It's bound to bring back some memories. And, just that. Like imagine that you remember the SS Palo Alto and those masts up there. Things that bring back memories are fantastic gifts. And this is bound to bring back memories for any long-term resident. And for anybody who is not older, maybe some of the younger ones, it's a history lesson. And it's a fun way to do it. This book is available at the Aptos Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
As well as this book right here, Rio Del Mar, a sedate residential community. This has excellent pictures, very clear pictures, too. They're very, very clear, easy to read. The text is easy on the eyes. Great book. Either one of these would make excellent Christmas gifts. And the Aptos History Museum is a 501c3. So you can donate and become a member as well. And so I encourage you to check it out. AptosHistory.org is the website, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So somewhere along the line, we were talking about railroads and narrow gauge and broad gauge and so forth. And I think John has an interesting little tidbit for us.
Well, this goes with our railroad displays. Does the statement "we've always done it that way" ring any bells? In the United States, the standard railroad gauge, and that's the distance between the rails, mm-hmm. is 4 feet 8.5 inches.
Okay.
That's a weird number, don't you think? How did it get that way?
That is a weird number, yeah.
Because that's the way they built railroads in England, and English expatriates built the U.S. railroads. Why did the English build them that way? Because the first rail lines were built by the same people who built the pre-railroad tramways, and that's the gauge they used. Why did they use that gauge? Because people who built the tramways used the same jigs and tools that were used for building wagons, which used that wheel spacing.
Wow.
Okay. Why did the wagons have that particular odd wheel spacing? Well, if they tried to use any other spacing, the wagon wheels would break on some of the old long-distance roads in England because that's the spacing of the wheel ruts. So who built the old rutted roads? Imperial Rome built the first long-distance roads in Europe and England for the legions, and the roads have been used ever since. Roman war chariots formed the initial ruts, which everyone else had to match for fear of destroying their wagon wheels. Since the chariots were made for Imperial Rome, they were all alike in regard to wheel spacing. The United States standard railroad gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches is derived from the original specifications for an Imperial Roman war chariot. And bureaucracies live forever. So the next time you're handed a specification and wonder what horses behind came up with it, you may be exactly right. Imperial Rome war chariots were made just wide enough to accommodate the back end of 2 war horses.
What? That is so... That is amazing.
It is.
That is really, really cool.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because, you would all have to have a standard or whatever those ruts in the roadway are. You'd have to have your wheels go into them because any other way you're just going to rip your thing apart or get stuck, sideways or cockeyed or whatever. Wow, that is very cool.
So not directly related to Aptos or Capitola.
But cool nonetheless.
But still cool nonetheless.
Wow.
Worldwide, we brought a little international history to you.
Well, we still had railroads going through the area, right? Through Rio Del Mar and
Yes.
Aptos.
Yeah.
Up in Nisene Marks, there were, I don't know if there are railways, but there are certainly tramways.
They built Nisene Marks, Southern Pacific. They had broad gauged our railroad. Remember, it was built as a narrow gauge railroad with small rails and closer together.
Mm-hmm.
And the standard for narrow gauge varies a little bit, but when they broad gauged it so that it would match the Southern Pacific in Pajaro, they took a standard gauge full-size railroad up into Nisene Marks. It was the most expensive railroad that Southern Pacific ever built. They had those giant trains up in there. Now, once they got all of the trees cut at the lower altitude, in order to get to the trees that were really much higher up on the ridge lines, they ran a narrow gauge railroad up. I won't go into it. But anyway, they ran a narrow gauge railroad up at the top so that they could get the rest of the trees out. But Southern Pacific, standard gauge railroad all the way up.
Have you guys ever heard of the supposed steam engine or locomotive, I don't know, the front part of the train that's in the forest? Have you guys ever heard that rumor? That there somewhere out there is a lost train in the forest?
I hear it all the time.
Have you ever seen it?
I haven't.
I have not.
But there are people who've seen it, and it's quite a ways up there.
I think I've seen it.
You have?
Really?
I believe so.
I told you were setting us up.
I was going to ask. I was going to ask you, did they mention where it is? Because I'm going to tell you where it is, and just so you know that, and you can tell them, yeah, I heard that before. I don't know what the name of the trail is, but eventually, if you go up to West Ridge Trail, I think is what it's called, and you start heading towards Olive Springs, and there's a quarry out there. Somewhere along the trail out there, somewhere along the fire road, there's a curve, and it's marked around this turn. There's a bunch of stones that are stacked up, kind of like a makeshift marker, if you will, because it doesn't do anything. It's not going to block anything. It's not going to do anything, but it's there. They were obviously put there. When you look over the ledge from there, you will see a giant boiler. And I think that's a mistake. And I think a lot of people mistake that for the train. And it's not a train. It's a boiler. I'm assuming it's part of a steam donkey that they would use to haul these loads up and down the hill. I'm assuming that that's what it is. But it's somewhere along that trail. As you're heading towards Olive Springs, you look off to the side at that marker, and you will see that boiler sticking out of the hill. And I think that's what a lot of people mistake as the train in the forest. But it's not a train, but there is something there, and you can see it.
Yeah, they did use steam donkeys to get the trains up to the narrow gauge line. They actually hooked the trains up to steam donkeys on a wire connection and hauled them up what they call the incline. And they literally hauled them hundreds of feet up the hill on this incline. The railroad wouldn't have been able to do it by itself. So steam donkeys pulled everything to the top and were used and let everything back down again.
Yeah, that's what I suspect that people see. They're not making it up. They see something out there, but I don't think it's a train. They're mistaken there.
There was a train that went over the side.
Oh.
Yeah, there's reason to believe, and that's the general area, I think, where it is. But I haven't been that far up into Nisene myself.
Oh, man, it's gnarly. When I went out there, somebody stopped me. He said, "What are you doing?" And I told him, and he said, most people come up here and they take an Uber or they take something, once they get to that end, they don't go back. But I go, no, I'm gonna go hiking back, and I did. But yeah, it's far out there. It is far out there.
I have a few interesting facts about the Forest of Nisene Marks State Park.
Okay.
Talking about interesting people and how that park got its name. And it's about 10,000 acres of rugged semi-wilderness going from sea level up to about 2,600 feet. And it's land that was clear-cut during that 40-year logging frenzy from 1883 to 1923. And when the loggers left Aptos Canyon, the forest began to heal itself, and the scars grew fainter with each passing year. But visitors can still find evidence of logging operations, mill sites, and trusses in the park. Now, that land was purchased by the Marks family, M-A-R-K-S, in the late 1950s, and it was donated to the state in 1963. The park was named for Nisene Marks, and she was the matriarch of the farming family from Salinas, and she passed away in 1955. So that's where the name Nisene Marks comes from, the Forest of Nisene Marks. Again, another interesting person and an interesting family having to do with Aptos.
Very, very cool. I got a phone call here, and I want to get to that because he's been hanging on for a long time. But I also have some text messages here, and then we'll get back to your pile of paperwork.
Okay.
Let's see who we have here first. This caller ends in 41. Can we get your first name and where you're calling from?
What's up, man? Eli, calling from Highway 17.
Eli, what do you have to say?
What's up, man? It's not really having to do nothing with the topic, but northbound going to San Jose, it was a big crash passing the summit. Car flipped over. I didn't see it or nothing. I just seen the aftermath. This was about 25 minutes ago. So, man, if you're planning to go to San Jose, I wouldn't go right now.
Okay, I see it here, Eli. Thank you for the call. I see it's near Redwood Estates. Northbound 17 traffic is backed up to the summit. Yikes. Thank you for the call, 831-479-1080. Somebody sent me a text here and says, there is recently a disappearance, a woman disappeared near Aptos Beach. They're asking, are there any new mysteries that you guys know about? Are there any old mysteries? Any unsolved mysteries? Anything that be interesting? Missing famous people? Anything like that we know of? Sea monsters? They know there was a mysterious carcass that washed ashore north of Santa Cruz. I mean, have we ever had anything like that? Shipwrecks, sea monsters?
Well, we've had commercial fishing boats wash up onto the beach, yes. And,
really?
Yeah, and whales. And so that always provides a lot of interest if you're one of the beach walkers that goes back and forth every day. So it's an ever-changing landscape.
Mm-hmm. I found interesting the piers out there that you mentioned on Seacliff Beach. Is that Seacliff Beach or Rio Del Mar?
It's Rio, where the old pilings are that you can see every day. It's Seacliff where the pilings are from the Castro Wharf. They're not very far apart.
831-479-1080. Let me see. Bunch of compliments. I mean, they say, hey, I love these guys. The show is great.
Good. Join the museum.
So this guy right here, he says, hey, Dave, what's up with the house in Nisene Marks by all the springs where that dude lives? Looks kind of crazy. That is the guy who said, what are you doing? Most people take a Uber from this point. That is, you're going in the right direction near where I saw that that boiler out there. Whoever wrote that's where I'm talking about. It's out near that area. It's way in the heck out there. This show is great, keeping history alive. Thanks. We appreciate you guys. What else do we have interesting to share?
Well, it's not a missing person or a story like that, but talking about where some names come from.
Oh, I love that.
There's in the Seacliff, Seacliff area, there's a street called Ord Street, O-R-D.
Okay.
And back in the 1850s, Rafael Castro, who was the Mexican land grantee of the Aptos Rancho, he sought legal advice about divorcing his wife. And he paid the attorney $1 and deeded him a 70-acre tract of Borregas Gulch. By the way, the lawyer's advice to him was, don't do it. Don't get divorced.
Okay.
So the attorney was named Pacificus Ord, who later became a federal DA for the Southern District of California. And his father was named James L. Ord, and he was kind of a mysterious political exile from England, and they say he was possibly the illegitimate son of King George IV. And he was fostered to the Ord family who had emigrated to the United States. And there was another son named James L., and he acquired the Seacliff area farm and deeded it to his own son. And so that's where Ord Street came from. Now, everybody is more familiar with Fort Ord, which was named after another son from that family, Major General Edward O.C. Ord, and he was a highly regarded West Point graduate and mathematical genius, fort designer, and mapmaker who fought in the Civil War and was instrumental in forcing the surrender of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. And so Fort Ord, which was established in 1917, was named after him.
I love the way history ties everything together. And, when you have such a small area as we do, Santa Cruz County it's pretty big. Actually, it's pretty small, right? It's square mileage.
Second smallest county in the state. San Francisco's the smallest.
Yeah.
And I drive by that. I live in the Seacliff area, and I drive by that Ord Street frequently.
Help me picture where Ord Street is.
If you go north from the Seacliff area up Mar Vista Drive toward the freeway, and if you go off to the left there's some streets called Margaret and Lorraine, I think. And if you turn left on Margaret or Lorraine, that would be going west. Ord Street is down toward the end of those.
Okay. Anything else that we have to cover here? I was looking through this book, and something that caught my attention was a picture of Valencia School. Is that still around, that building?
It's still there.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was originally called Aptos School.
The Montgomery Glider?
I think we briefly touched on that last time, but
it's worth repeating.
John Montgomery is credited with having the first controlled glider flight in history. He did that in the late 1800s, down in Otay Mesa, San Diego. Mm-hmm. He was a brilliant man, and he was studying birds, and he wanted to make an airplane. So he eventually came up to Santa Clara College and taught there. and he was working on his glider. The glider, the intent was to be able to fly like a bird. And he started with a 3-foot glider. And his friend, John Leonard said, if you're going to work on this thing, why don't you come to my dad's ranch, which is Seascape, the Leonard Ranch. And he started throwing this glider off the Manresa trestle. And he sized it up from 3 feet to 28 feet across. It was a 2-wing glider. There were parachutists before there were planes because they jumped out of hot air balloons, and they did it at the boardwalk.
Wow.
Okay. So Swanton, who owned that at the time, the Neptune Casino, he wanted to have the rights to take this around the world and promote this airplane. And so what they did is they hooked it up to a hot air balloon in Seascape, the Leonard Ranch, took it up to 3,000 feet, cut it loose, and flew it for 18 minutes over 2 miles in front of the press. He was the most famous guy in the world at the time. The Wright brothers. I have a little story on the wall called Rights and Wrongs.
Okay.
But let's just say that they got all of their original ideals from a broker who shared information from about the 5 or 6 people in the world who actually invented aeronautics. Unfortunately, so the very first public airplane flights, not powered, but public, was in Seascape in 1905. And the reason that the Wright brothers got the control of the patent for it was because Montgomery died, and they took pictures. They took a moving picture of their flight in December of 1903. It was just gliding. And the propellers, when you look at the photograph, there's no way that those propellers had any lift because they were turning really, really slowly. But it took them about 5 more years before they actually got the thing to fly, and then they sold it to the Army. But by that time, they were able to become the people that supposedly invented powered flight.
Is that what they sold it to the Army?
Yeah.
Wow.
That story goes on. It's a really fun story, but it would never stop if I didn't shut up now. But one thing, if we have a couple minutes, I just wanted to touch on, Rafael Castro got the 6,600-acre Rancho Aptos. Mm-hmm. And the whole industry at that time was leather and tallow. So these people who got land grants from Mexico after Mexico became a country, all they did was raise cattle. And they didn't raise them for food. They raised hundreds of cows, and they wanted the leather. So even if you just don't take Aptos, if you take the Spanish people who came and developed the whole South America, Central America, North America, California, New Mexico, Arizona, and also Florida. And Florida is actually, St. Augustine is the oldest city in America. We don't talk about that too much because that was Spanish. But anyway, they were the original cowboys. And so they brought horses, they brought cattle, and all of the things that we think about Western cowboys being typical Yankees, they learned everything from the Spanish. And the words that we talk about for cowboys are things like, well, let's talk about the name cowboy. It comes from caballero, the horseman. Okay? But if you think about the name of the horse, caballo, mm-hmm. Cowboy, it's right there.
Huh.
Okay, so when you talk about hombre, that's obviously a Spanish word. It means man. Juzgao for the jail. Juzgado, that's where that came from. A lariat from la riata, the rope. Loco, meaning insane. Mustang from mesteño, and that means stray. Okay. If you talk about ranch, so rancho, it means the land upon which the stock was raised. And a rancher from ranchero, which means the boss. So you had a rancho and the ranchero. And it just kind of goes on. Spurs from the espuelas that were worn on the boots, and stirrups from estribo, used to mount a horse and ride properly. Vamoose from the Spanish vamos, or let's go, and vigilante, meaning guardian of the law, righteous vigilant. Those are, I just like to give a bigger picture than we typically have about the history of our country, because it's so much bigger than we have time to learn until probably we get out of school, and then we start to get really interested.
You know, that's part of the downside of I don't know if it's a downside or not, but it's kind of poor timing that we don't get into this stuff until we get older, right? I mean, can you imagine if you were this excited about learning all this when you were younger, and all the information you could amass by the time you're in your 50s or your 60s? But for some reason, that for most people, you know, me in particular, probably didn't really start reading history till I was 40, and then I started to get into it. For you, it was the picture that's on this coloring book on the front page that got you hooked. That was it, right?
It did. The pictures and the stories.
Did we say on the air when Dick came in and said, "Hey, did you hear those stories about the murders?" We did talk about that, right?
We did.
Okay. So, just a reminder: Christmas around the corner. These would make excellent gifts for people who are really into history. Some of the longer time residents, and maybe even people who are curious about history. Either one of them will love these books. They're both $20 a piece. This is $20.
That one's 25.
25, still just a great deal. Rio Del Mar, a sedate residential community, and the Aptos History Coloring Book. Again, they are a 5013C. Did I say that right?
C3, yeah.
I always get that confused.
Close enough.
501c3. AptosHistory.org is their website. You can go there, donate, become a member, and find out more. AptosHistory.org. We got 10 minutes left. What are we going to talk about?
People who walk in the door. Last time we talked about the Blue Angels, and somebody walking in and saying, "What do you know about Butch Voorhees?" And that's just how we've learned everything. And I had a man walk in with the oddest looking things. They looked like about the size of marbles. They were 3 different sizes. They were white. And it turns out that he built a house in the Rio Del Mar flats. But he built it up against the edge of the cliff where Rio Del Mar Boulevard comes down. And so they had to excavate into the cliff a little bit. And he found these white marble-looking things, and he didn't know what they were. And so eventually he was able to investigate and find out that they are gastroliths. What's a gastrolith? Well, it turns out that ancient sea creatures are like birds. They have a craw, and in order to break stuff down and digest it, they pick up rocks. And as those rocks grind up the food, they eventually round themselves out. And so we have 3 gastroliths that were given to the museum that came out of Rio Del Mar flats from ancient creatures from the dinosaur era. Just amazing stuff that people walk in the door with it, and they say, "Do you want these?" And I go, "Oh, yeah."
What kind of question is that? Of course I want those. Wow.
So I could tell a story like this.
Wow, dude. And that's at the Aptos History Museum?
Yeah, we don't have them currently on display, but if you want to come by and buy a book, I'll show them to you.
Dang, that's unbelievable. 831-479-1080. We have a call coming in. Let's see what they have to say. This caller ends in 30. Your first name and where you're calling from?
Jeff, and somewhere between Capitola and Santa Cruz, driving home.
All right, what do you have to say?
Well, it's interesting that about the gastroliths that he was talking about, the little balls. You might want to have them x-rayed because, at least on the East Coast, those things were usually there were stories during the 1950s of boys who found those, and an archaeologist took his penknife out and cut them open. And inside were jewels. It used to be a way that pirates would hide their gems, was to encase them in clay. You might want to have them X-rayed.
Interesting.
I love the idea.
Thank you for the call.
Oh my God! Thank
you for the call. 831-479-1080. Would you rather find out that there were hidden jewels in them, or is it more exciting to think that they came from a prehistoric creature?
Well, that's more exciting, but if they'd help us build a new museum, bring it.
If they had diamonds in them or something like that?
Yeah.
Wow. What else do we have?
Hey, John, I was wondering if a quick review of the Aptos Fire Department might be a good way to kind of finish up.
There is a display at the library right now of the Aptos Fire Department, and Aptos had one of the most advanced fire departments all the time in Santa Cruz County, and partially because most places were built of wood, but Aptos, everything was wood,
mm-hmm.
and the town kept burning down all the time. There was about 300 or 400 people that lived in the vicinity of Aptos, and remember, we talked about apples replacing lumber. So there was Ralph Madison ran the vinegar works, and he did some apple sales too. But remember the skins and the cores and the ugly apples, they all got chopped up. And the skin and the cores wound up turning into vinegar, and the ugly apples turned into dried apples. So that was his business, and he did that business with Lam Pan. He had a whole group of Chinese people who ran the apple dryer,
mm-hmm.
And that was just an amazing relationship. They had a great friendship their whole life, but his vinegar works caught on fire, and they nearly burned the rest of the house, the rest of the town down. There was only about 5 hydrants. They started with 1, and eventually they decided they need to have a fire department. And so Ralph became the fire chief for 40 years. But they bought a locomobile chassis, and they put dry fire extinguishers on it, buckets, ladders, all that sort of stuff. So they started the fire department. The Aptos Fire Department was the first to have paramedics on board.
Was that first fire truck in about 1929?
Yeah, that's about right, yes.
Wow.
And so it grew to where there was 3 different fire stations that they eventually picked up La Selva Beach too, so it was Aptos La Selva. And then just a couple years ago, it incorporated into Central. So we have the Aptos Fire Department's full history from beginning to end. And we were lucky enough to get the book that has all the minutes of the first early years of the Aptos Fire Department. We have quite a few pictures where Aptos Barbecue today was the second fire department building. But just a great bunch of people. It was a really forward-thinking fire department, and it was just to keep the town from burning down because it was just a constant threat. So if you'd like to see a little bit more, go to the library and look at that particular exhibit.
And the fire truck had buckets on it. I'm assuming these are in the days of the quote-unquote bucket brigade?
Absolutely, yeah. And before that, there was a bell out in front of the Bayview Hotel, so if something caught on fire, you went and rang the bell and everybody would run out and grab buckets. And eventually they had 150 feet of hose and 5 different hydrants. But that's what led to the great department that we have had and the one that we have today.
And if I remember right, that Aptos Barbecue building. If you look at it says it's been painted over, of course, but if you look at it just right, you can actually still see the lettering behind it that says Aptos Fire Department.
Yeah.
And if I also remember right, didn't the building right next door to that fire department building actually burn down because of lack of water?
Absolutely. and the Rio Del Mar Hotel burned down for the same exact reason.
Even though it was that close to the fire station?
It was right next door, that one.
The one that he's talking about was right next door, but it was a gas station, and there was no putting it out.
that kind of figures. The Bayview, how old is that thing? Is that an original building? I mean, is it as old as it looks?
1878. Wow. And it opened as a hotel about 4 or 5 years later, because that's when they were broad gauging. Southern Pacific was changing the railroad from narrow gauge to broad gauge. So there was no reason to have a hotel if you couldn't get there.
Do I remember correctly that it was moved?
Yeah, that's correct. The owner of the hotel wanted to build a hardware store on the corner, the Tony's, and they were going to tear it down because that's what you did in those days.
Wow.
You used the wood. You'd use it for something else. And so the PG&E crew at West Coast Counties was going to do some work in the village, and so they needed a place to stay. So he jacked it up. He and some of his friends got a hold of all the stuff you used to move a building, and they shoved it over about 100 feet, moved it back behind the magnolia tree that's there now.
Amazing. John Hibble and Dick Garwood, thank you for joining us. I have 30 seconds left, so I'm going to remind people during tomorrow's show about how they can contribute to the cause. But aptoshistory.org, be sure to check that out. Head down to the Aptos Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
And purchase these books, the Aptos History Coloring